All right there, welcome everybody. It's Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. So we meet every week to draw together. This is the subject we're working on today. If you're new, I'd love to see where you're viewing from. If you're watching this as a recording, please add some comments to the video below. We get a lot of comments during the live session, but I think a lot of you are also watching the playback, and so I'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts about what you're observing, your thoughts on drawing, thoughts about art in general that you want to contribute to the conversation. So if you're new though, what the show is about us getting together once a week to draw so that we can advance our practice as drawing artists, as painters, whatever. If you call yourself an artist or you don't call yourself an artist, this is the place for you. So we just want to come together to draw. And the subject right below me, that table lamp, that's the subject for today. You can find that reference in the description below. You can also find a link to artistnetwork.com to this show page where you can share your work if you're drawing along with us. So you'll also find a list of materials. What are we working on today? This is the Rives BFK cotton rag paper that I enjoy working with so much. Actually, you know what? I forgot. Let me grab this. I got vine charcoal here, and I am also working with some compressed charcoal pencils. So I have a variety of hard and soft here that I'll be building the drawing from. So using the vine charcoal and the compressed charcoal, I have my trusty blending stump. This one has been well used. Gotta kind of reshape that. It's kind of getting a little squished. And then my erasers, my Derwent retractable rubber eraser, as well as a kneaded eraser. So this is a tricky subject. I'm glad I completed this preparatory drawing. Actually, I took 2 stabs at this because the first attempt did not go well. And it was all because my head was in the wrong place when I was thinking about this. My initial kind of objective with the first kind of stab at the drawing was to focus more on the perspective of the table. And it sent me down this path in the drawing that wasn't working. I spent too much time focusing on, especially that grid pattern on the kind of the checkered tablecloth there. And then when I stepped back, I realized really what this image is about is the light. And so we're going to build the drawing from the light. That's what I'm going to be demonstrating. But again, this is all about us drawing together. And I'm going to talk through my process, but you may have an entirely different process. You may want to use different media. What we're trying to discover here is what in this image and in the practice of creating this drawing is going to move your own practice forward. So, and if we do that, if we take one step forward with each drawing, we're going to get that much closer to really kind of synchronizing our brains and our minds and what's happening on the page. That's what this is all about, right? This isn't about us becoming master artists, and calling ourselves artists, calling ourselves masters. This is about just moving forward and creating a habit for us to keep working and moving in any direction as artists. Sometimes actually stepping back and kind of abandoning your skills and trying something entirely new and feeling like, like you're just kind of clumsily navigating your way through a drawing is the way to move forward. So there is no kind of linear progress. That's what we practice here. So see a lot of people chiming in. We get people from all over the world. I love to see all the familiar names. You guys have been with me for a very long time, so I love it. All right, let's get to it. One kind of quick thing that I want to kind of also talk about that I'm kind of mentioning it for myself so I can circle back around to this concept is the idea of really matching the photo one-to-one. We talk about that a lot in this series, that you as the artist are in control of how kind of accurate your drawing needs to be relative to the subject. If you can work from a direct observation, if you had a still life like this set up, a lamp that you could turn on a table, that's going to give you the greatest opportunity for growth. I think working from a photograph can also help you advance your skills. But I think going into a drawing with a certain amount of clarity for yourself about how accuracy plays in to the process for you can go a long way. So if you're so inclined to want to make your drawing 100% accurate to the reference photo, then have that as one of your objectives. If you just want to use the reference photo as a jumping off point and you start to make all sorts of adjustments to it to suit the composition, then go for that. Where I've always struggled in the past with my drawings is not really being clear on that, and kind of getting caught in this no man's land of going back and forth between trying to make it look accurate and then also embellishing or adjusting things, as I go along. And I bring that up because one of the real big challenges in this drawing was this light, and of course there's the quality of light, trying to make that glowing kind of effect essentially on the page. But then there's also it as a subject, and there's something that happens in my mind when I see that lamp. I go right to it, and everything else kind of shuts down, and that light and that the shakers there in front of it just get larger and larger, right? So there's the optical truth to this reference photo. There is a very specific relationship between the scale of the lamp and the table. But then there's also the symbolic truth to it that your brain is interpreting and applying to this. And both of those are valid. And I just want that to be kind of a topic that we circle back around to for this drawing is what kind of editorial decisions are you going to make that help you really connect with the subject and connect with the drawing. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a lot of talking up front, so we'll just get right to it. So that's just something that's going to be in my mind as we go along. With the fine charcoal, what do I want to do? Again, in the interest of starting and kind of building it with the light in mind, my goal is at this stage going to be to establish the light off right out of the gates. This is, I'm going to try to ignore any sort of kind of attention that my brain is trying to place on the subjects. I'm not going to be thinking about lamp. I'm not going to be thinking about table. I'm just thinking about basic shapes that the light might be creating. And to help me do that, I'm allowing my eyes to kind of softly focus. So I'm just kind of observing this kind of hourglass form that is created by the shapes of these light and shadow forms here. And then out of these shapes, out of this quality of light, we're going to bring the actual objects into view. Now, if you're working in graphite, then if you have actually a stick of graphite, that could be helpful at this stage. Actually, a soft graphite can help you kind of fill in areas a little bit more quickly. Use the side of your pencil as much as you can. And you can see I'm just kind of wiping down with the palm. I do have a paper towel next to me that I can use, but I don't really feel like slowing down right now, so I'm just going to go for it with my hand. And then what I'm observing is that somewhere kind of here in the middle is kind of the highest contrast. That's one of the things that's pulling my eye towards the light, is that's where the contrast is. So squinting, I'm kind of closing one eye and then squinting with the other, so I'm allowing just a very small amount of light to enter through my pupil onto the retina. And if I were painting this is how I would approach it as well, is try to find an initial contrast between just basic light and shadow shapes. And then we start to subdivide. And at this early stage, I'm not all that familiar with the subject. There's a lot that we can really sink our teeth into, so we can just treat these as really basic forms that we can then kind of massage further. So I could start to add a little bit more specificity, but I'm trying not to think about or calculate anything now. I'm just reacting to the forms. Now this is, again, just kind of my particular way of working. For some of you, you may be building your drawing by kind of mapping it out using lines. And that might work for you. The challenge that I've had when doing that in the past has been that when I start with lines, when I'm kind of defining all of the forms by line and then filling in with the value, I find myself constantly fighting those edges, those sharp edges. And I'm gonna flip that thinking, start with these soft edges and then gradually refine them. Welcome everybody. We see, again, more people chiming in where you're from. I love it. I hope the weather is doing okay out there. It's a beautiful day here in Colorado. We had some snow this morning, so that was fun. I know there's been some fires burning up near here, so that's not so much fun. It was kind of disappointing to see the smoke over the mountains coming down there below Long's Peak yesterday morning. In terms of technique, I'm really trying to let the pressure of the charcoal do its thing. And by building up lots of light layers, it helps me to achieve kind of a smoother gradation. And I'm using the side of the charcoal stick. And with regards to pressure, it can be really helpful sometimes just to make sure you're thinking a little bit where the pressure is being applied along each stroke. So while this is happening very quickly on the surface for me, if I emphasize pressure on the ends of the strokes, I'm going to end up with these hard edges. If I kind of lift off the page and drop it down like this, I kind of rock it a little bit, it gives me those softer edges. And I'm kind of doing something in the middle of that. And when I get to this area here where there's really a soft transition between those values, I'm intentionally kind of letting up, as I drag and lift into this so that I don't have a hard edge that I'm going to have to contend with later. And then I kind of flip that on this side where I'm scooping and pushing away to, kind of enhance that softer edge. And I'm leaving this as white, but I'm not going to be too precious with it. I can lift off with a kneaded eraser. And I haven't done any measuring at this point, really just getting familiar with the subject. And I kind of have to ground myself a little bit. Like I'm a little scattered today. I say that all the time. I think now Wednesdays are my favorite days now when I can take some time to draw with you all. My head has just been in a lot of different places this week. So I need to just kind of engage with not the drawing, but drawing with the act of it a little bit right now. So that's kind of where my head's at right now. So while I'm thinking about it, next week, Thanksgiving week here in the US, I will not be here live, but I do have a recording that will be posted, and it's going to go at the same time. So if you're all going to be able to draw, then you'll have that subject. But one of the things that came out of that recording, I created that recording, when was it, yesterday? Monday. I created that recording Monday. I started to reflect on really what are the fundamental, what is fundamental about the marks that I'm making, the decisions I'm making. There's the process that we go through. So at this stage of making a calculated decision, to just be thinking about basic shapes and values. But then there are decisions that we make about individual elements, right? And one of the things that came up in that recording was how I try to really think about a very few things. Like what's most critical, and what can I apply to any subject? And the thing that kind of comes to mind for me is shape and then direction. And that's something that really hadn't kind of come up into mind, but we've talked about it a bit before in the series, is the role that the direction of the marks plays. And some subjects are kind of a little bit, they're a little bit more clear in how we can express the direction of our marks. But if we're trying to strip away all there is to know about drawing into a few key things, then one of the things that I've been really focusing on is what is the shape that I'm looking at, and what direction do I need to move my material? Does it need to be vertical, diagonal? And out of that, I find that I can apply it to so many different subjects. I don't have to think about drawing a table lamp differently than drawing a portrait versus a landscape, versus an animal, right? We can just break any subject down into that. So there's kind of the procedural aspect to it, like how do we want to move through the observation of the subject in the drawing process, and then what decisions do we need to make about the elements that are within that. And so those two things, shape and direction, are really kind of bubbling to the top right now. And that may change. Next week I may be totally thinking about something else. That's what makes drawing so exciting. And that's why we do it every week, because each drawing gives us something new to discover. The idea of perfecting drawing is a little scary to me, because trying to discovering something new each time we draw is just feels more exciting than kind of perfecting something that I've may have already kind of practiced before. So at least that's where my head's at this week, and I may be totally different next week. But if any of you have thoughts about that, if that brings up something for you, throw that out in the chat. I have it up here right next to me. I didn't really mention that at the top of the show here, is that feel free to ask any questions, throw out your observations, and I'll do my best to address them. So at this point, when I'm thinking about proportions and placement, I'm really just going by my gut. I haven't done any calculation, but that is going to be an important stage in the process. But in order for me to calculate effectively, I need to give myself some information. I need more stuff happening on the page that I can make clear decisions about. With shapes established on the page, then I can say this shape, it's not the right shape, it's too big, it's too small, it's in the wrong place, those types of things. And then we can use our tools for measuring to make those adjustments. We haven't quite got to that point. So I just need to indicate some of these elements. And in keeping my eyes soft and out of focus, I'm not thinking about these as a rock and those shakers there. I'm not thinking about it as a lamp, just trying to think about it as a shape. And then I can make editorial decisions. Okay. Brent Desart, Vine Charcoal is so handy. I love Vine Charcoal. It's a great tool. I do have to be careful about the dust from it. I'm kind of working flat, so it's just kind of resting on it, but sometimes when I work vertically, it starts to pile up and I kind of breathe in too much of it. Kathy has a wonderful question. How do I sharpen my pencils without breaking them? I have lost an entirely new pencil just sharpening it. That's happened before. So I understand any frustration you might have. When I sharpen, I use a razor blade like this. The trick is making sure that this is sharp. You really only get a couple, kind of maybe 2 or 3 kind of reliable sharpenings out of a sharp blade. After that, it's hard to tell. And the thing that I do that's so frustrating is I'll stick with a dull blade and I'll be breaking off the point, getting frustrated, and thinking to myself, I need to change out the blade, and I'm not doing it. I don't know what is causing that, but sharp blade is really important. And then it's just a matter of really taking your time when I'm sharpening it. Now I'll just do it right over the paper here. Actually, I'll flip this upside down so you can see it. It's just a very light kind of back and forth. And as you change the angle of this, it's going to start to grab the charcoal more, and then it could break. But this is essentially all I do, and it may take me 5 minutes or so to sharpen a pencil. But when it's sharpened like this, then I don't have to I don't have to go back to sharpen the pencil much when I'm drawing, if at all. The other thing to watch out for is there's a little bit of what appears to be adhesive where the wood casing it sticks to the core, and these pencils sometimes can break in shipping. Any sort of flex like that can break that core inside. So you could be sharpening along, thinking it's great, and you cut back a little bit too much of the wood casing, and you realize, oh crap, it snapped off. Sometimes that glue kind of actually gets in there and it'll hold it together. Not a lot that you can do if it's already broken in there. These are the General's pencils, and I've actually had really good luck with these. But I've had some pencils of all brands that just come kind of broken. So I had a set of the Faber-Castell charcoal pencils, the Pitt charcoal pencils. Those were great. I didn't have any breakage on those. Like I said, these Generals are working out well for me. So hopefully that makes sense. There is just kind of a lot of patience involved, and a lot of it comes down to how sharp the blade is. So okay, let's see. Greetings, everybody. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to kind of get back to it. Jackie, and welcome back. Hope the cruise was good. Sounds like it was. Let's see. All right, Troy, welcome. Glad you enjoy these. Yeah, tell all your friends. One of the things that I would hope out of this show is that it encourages anybody to pick up a pencil and to start drawing. And one of the frustrating things that I observe at times is when somebody starts drawing and then goes down the rabbit hole of thinking about, well, what is it? Am I an artist now? What does that mean? Am I going to starve? Right? And it kind of sucks the joy out of just sitting and drawing. And I think if I could kind of achieve anything out of this, it would just be to get people comfortable with, just sitting down and drawing for yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody. If you have a creative partner that can give you some good feedback and you can grow along with, that's awesome. But you don't have to call yourself an artist if you're not comfortable with that. If you need to call yourself an artist to draw, do that. But hopefully it just encourages people just to draw however, in whatever way that means to you. With the side of this fine charcoal, I'm still being aware of pressure, and so I am trying to lift this inside a little bit so that if I create any sort of kind of gradation, it's going to lean in on that side, kind of prioritize the weight as I move out from there. I'm trying to articulate some of the subtle things that I do that might be helpful, but again, this being a live show, we're drawing together. If you have specific techniques, things that help you control and manage the materials, I want to hear it. Let's see what you're doing, because I have learned a tremendous amount from you all in doing this show. So with the blending stump, I'm just kind of just moving the vine charcoal around. I don't want to lift too much, but I can start to make more precise decisions now. And I am still thinking about pressure. You can see how far back I'm holding it, because it allows me to start with essentially the lightest pressure possible and then lean in on it when I need to. So I can just kind of roll my wrist and apply a little bit more pressure to the tip of the pencil, the blending stump as I need to. So I want to kind of smooth out some of these things a little bit. And then I'm going to start to adjust the proportions. Like I said, I haven't taken any time to adjust anything or really calculate anything. But now that I have a sufficient amount of information on the page, I can start to really decide. And then this is where what I was talking about at the beginning about understanding the threshold, the tolerance for accuracy can be really important. And I'm of the mindset where accuracy is kind of perhaps less critical than it might have been in some of my other drawings. There's something about this lamp that I really want to convey in this drawing. I want to understand more deeply for myself what is the importance of this as a shape. Right? I'm really kind of getting pulled into it because of the contrast and of that glowing light. But the scale that I apply to this, the decisions I make around this lamp can help convey that. I don't want to exaggerate it to the point where it just feels either way too small or too big, and noticeably so. I want things to be a little bit subtle. But I also, again, I want to use this drawing as a record of my thinking throughout this whole process. And I think what I want to do is make the lamp a little bit larger than it might be in the photograph. But I want to do it in a way that it's kind of more subtle. So it almost feels like it would feel like a camera trick in a movie, right? Then where we're kind of pushing and pulling the focus to signify importance in a character or something. And now my mind is really on the lamp right now, but you can see I'm working on the wall. I'm doing that to help orient myself a little bit with regards to the lamp. Kind of thinking about where the center of the paper is. And if I look at the scale of the wall here, how is the lamp starting to take shape? And I prefer to use the blending stump at a stage like this because it's just a little bit more delicate. And if I really bear down on this, I could embed the charcoal a little bit too much in the paper, so I want to be careful with that. But I can lay in some light values pretty effectively. And what I forgot to mention too, if you're new, what I'm looking at in front of me is the same screen that you're observing. So I see this overhead projection. And that's really what I'm using to evaluate my proportions and make those changes. Let's see. I'm sorry you have to leave us early, Mary, but again, this will go up as a recording, so you'll be able to watch it back. LL, I'm glad to hear you helped this grandma pick up a pencil again. Just sketching with you has improved my drawing skills. That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. That's the kind of stuff that makes my day. Let's see. Ooh, Kathy has a question. What causes the charcoal to get clumpy on the paper, or does this happen to everyone? And hello from Pensacola. If so, I think so. What I'm gathering is that the charcoal, as you're laying it down, is really picking up. It's being picked up by the texture of the paper. It might be that the paper has a bit too much tooth for what you're working with. The paper makes a big difference. And what I'm working with now is the cotton rag paper. It's the Rives BFK. That's what I kind of prefer. I just keep coming back to it. Legion provides a variety of these cotton rag papers that I really enjoy. There's the Stonehenge, there's the Pesha, and I kind of rotate through all of them. There's a lot that you can experiment with. There are some really, fantastic bamboo papers that I really like with charcoal. And then there's kind of a different tooth. So what I like about the rag paper is that it naturally has a tooth. There's a softness to it. And it can be a little bit challenging sometimes to get extremely fine detail, but that's not what my approach is about anyway, so that it kind of works for me. But then there's other charcoal papers that have kind of an imprinted tooth, like a cold press watercolor paper or something. And there's a real strong texture. And I've had a little less luck working with those, but I think that's an area where I could practice a little bit more. But that's where my head goes, is if you're having trouble with the charcoal, it may have to do more with the type of paper you're working with, and you might try to experiment with some different ones. Let's see. Ray W, try the Stanley mini retractable knife. I find I get much more control when sharpening with them. Oh, that's a good, I gotta check that out. Yeah, I generally just grab a utility knife and replace the blades, but I haven't tried, really kind of experimented with different sharpening tools. Okay. I want to kind of indicate, I think part of what is going to be important as I talk about the lamp is its relationship to the chair. And what I see in the photograph is that the top part of this, the chair back, kind of falls in line with roughly the top of the light. So I'm going to kind of rough that observation in. And the other thing that I might look at early on is try to find a vanishing point. There's a slight amount of perspective that I think could come in really handy just to make sure that we get that tabletop working correctly, because if the light becomes important, I kind of need to set the stage for the light. And for me, I really want to make sure that the plane on the top of that table feels solid and stable, and we accept it and get right to that light. If that perspective is off, then what might happen is I'll get distracted by the table. It'll take too much importance because there's something in the mind that'll say something's not right here, and it'll just pull my attention. So what I kind of observe just by looking at the angles, if you kind of envision the edges of the table in the reference kind of extending, you start to see a vanishing point somewhere right around in here. And then that becomes a reference point to the chair backs here. So if we look at these top points of the back of the chair, they fall in a straight line that's parallel to these edges of the table, so they all converge at that vanishing point. And then we'll use that to work with some of the other elements of the chair later. But having a rough idea of that vanishing point it can be really helpful. And I'm not being very precise with it. Again, I just want to be kind of rough with it. And then evaluate where is that vanishing point relative to the lamp. And what I see in the reference photo is that vanishing point is somewhere right around here, just really kind of essentially dividing the lamp shade. And again, that's if we're drawing it accurately. So then I need to make a decision about, well, how do I want to adjust it? Because there's something about the scale that I have right here. If I move my eyes back and forth between the reference image and the drawing, this feels like the lamp is advancing, and I kind of like that, right? Hopefully, if I kind of ignore, if I cut out and I don't look at the reference image, I don't see that contrast. So I'm just kind of evaluating the drawing on its own without the reference image. And there's something too about in the reference photo, the light is a little bit off to the right a little bit more. I'm bringing it in over towards the center, and I kind of like that a little bit. I feel like what that does is it aligns with the way I initially feel about the subject, it starts to convey something more about the impression I get from it, rather than kind of editing for the optical truth, editing for precision. You know, that can, you know, something that we have to decide when I'm painting plein air outdoors, and I'm working on the landscape, you know, and balancing, there's the optical truth, there's the literal truth, and then there's the symbolic truth of the subject, and finding the ratio that really kind of works. You know, sometimes there'll be a distant tree that optically is taking up a very small amount of my field of vision, but it's pulling a lot of my attention. And so I might kind of make it a little bit larger than it actually is, than it optically is, in order to kind of express something about, well, what is my brain doing to that as a subject? So, all right, let's see. Thank you, Mad Moments Go. That's funny. Yeah, I'll say you're welcome, and it's true. My grandson thinks I bought my drawings and paintings. That's awesome. Fantastic. Yeah, I think I've just been thinking a lot about, you know, I think again, what it comes down to for me is I just would love to see more people draw. It hurts my heart a little bit when people say I can't draw. And I get it. I understand the frustration and the fear behind that, because generally what is meant by a statement like that says I can't draw is that the drawing doesn't look like the subject as accurately as it should be. But there's a whole lot to drawing, and accuracy is just one decision that you have to make as an artist. And sometimes you discover that throughout the drawing process. And those are all skills that anybody can learn. Some people just have a kind of a natural tendency to pick that up more quickly than others, but there's no race happening in the art world. And in fact, I've talked about this before. In fact, I think a big objective of mine in the past has been to slow down, because I intend to go way too fast for the depth that I would like to achieve in my work. The thing that holds me back is working quickly. And so when I would hear people kind of praise me for that, I would have to caution that and say, hey, it may kind of sound good out the gate saying that, no, you did that so quickly. How'd you do that so quickly? Well, what I feel is missing in those is then the level of depth in the drawing that I would like to achieve. I had sacrificed that depth for speed, and it wasn't advancing my skills the way I wanted it to. So I've had to teach myself to slow down. Hopefully that makes sense. Kind of curious if you all have thoughts about, I don't know, just the pace at which you work. But all right, I think I need to shift gears to this compressed charcoal. So I've got a lot of these little stubs of charcoal. I'm going to save for the 4B soft one for later. I believe both of these are an H or an HB, kind of mid-range hardness. No, that feels too soft. I get to feel it right away. I must have grabbed the wrong one. Stick that in there. And I enjoy using these extenders, because I can really kind of lay back a bit on the material, and I can lay it almost entirely flat. I'm going to move this thing here. All right, so now I'm going to actually, I often will save the focal point for last, but I'm going to lead with it this time. So I'm going to start with this lampshade, and one of the things that I observe in this is how this edge here is really vertical, and I really like that. As that focal point kind of in the center, you get this kind of a cross form here, where you have this dark, kind of the value contrast orienting itself horizontally and contrasting the kind of the vertical edge along in there. And then I like that edge. And then I just need to kind of visualize a symmetrical axis, maybe if I can find the center here. When it comes to the ellipse, this is going to be fun. I'm kind of starting by establishing the front edge and the back edge, trying to evaluate this vertical distance here, establishing the ends that are as kind of perpendicular. There's short kind of perpendicular lines. And then from there, we can start to round out and create the ellipse. And I want to be very gentle with this line because it just about disappears when I let my eyes lose focus. That edge just about disappears. There's a little bit of a shadow that creeps in behind there. Now, this isn't the ellipse that I want to preserve. It's not quite accurate, and that's all right. That's, I'm going to expect that I'm going to need to massage that a little bit. I know when earlier on in my drawing, there was a time when I would really just try to make that as one smooth ellipse, feeling like that fluidity was really essential for creating the ellipse. And what I sacrificed in that fluidity, in trying to strike that that ellipse as in a single pass, what I sacrificed then was accuracy and real control. And so I started to kind of flip that a little bit. Let me try to just fill this in here. Okay. Hello, AMO Earthly. Welcome. I don't recognize that name, so if you're new, welcome. If you've been with us for a while, I apologize. So I recognize a lot of names, too many to call out. If you are new, I want to welcome you. All right, so I don't like the height of this, so I'm going to adjust that down. That's better. That feels better. And as I'm going to kind of approach these, I'm really kind of trying to be mindful of edges, because that's what's ultimately going to create the luminous kind of quality in this. That's what this drawing is about. What I try to do in the subjects is reduce it to as simple shapes as possible. So I let my eyes blur to the point where I can't really recognize it anymore, and then slowly bring it into focus and try to find that point at which the brain recognizes it as the subject, and then that becomes almost the target right there. That's the substance of the drawing, is that point where there's something that gets clicked in the brain that just fills in a lot of information. And that's what ultimately I want to try to capture as best as I can, and then refining it further, adding more detail essentially, simply kind of enhances it, but it's not, there's nothing really kind of critical being, that the detail is relying on, or that is necessary for all that detail. So it doesn't look like I'm doing a whole lot, but I'm just laying down kind of a pass with the more permanent compressed charcoal. As I'm doing that, I'm allowing the pencil to kind of roll in my fingers, so I'm not developing these flat spots. And as I look at the lamp here, we can observe the the value relationships here, where it gets darker towards the base of the lampshade. Still using the side of the pencil. I'm going to switch to this circular omnidirectional mark. Just a little bit easier for me to work with. Because if I get oh no. Oh, I have this pencil. I lost one of my pencils. I might have to go down and grab that in a bit. I lost my train of thought there. Kind of bring this into focus a little bit right now. And then I'll continue to refine that. And so as I create this back edge of the ellipse, I'm actually drawing the wall around it, leading up to that edge. And then I want to close this in a little bit more. And then hopefully then what's being established right off the bat then is that focal point. And then it's just a matter of making decisions in the rest of the drawing with regards to how it supports the focal point. And then I have this base value that I use to create the lampshade. As I darken this area, you can see how now that starts to take on more of a luminous quality. And I'm also kind of having in the back of my mind, I have the ability to go even darker with the charcoal. So Diane B13, a wonderful comment there. First, you have to draw for your own pleasure and not for someone else's. I suppose that's true, especially unless your job is as a commercial artist and and you have to kind of solve a problem for somebody else. But I hear what you're saying. That's my take as well. I think that's where the power in drawing is that they become, again, I kind of consider them like footprints in the snow that reveal the journey our mind is taking as it understands the world around it. This is kind of evidence of the thinking mind, is what a drawing can ultimately reveal. I know there was a time when I wanted my drawings to ultimately reveal how skilled I was, right? And then I've, over time, deprioritized that. Just kind of taking the joy out of drawing. So I'm just kind of refining this shape here, specifically looking at the balance between the negative space back here and the positive space. So if you're struggling with that form, especially with the ellipse, it can sometimes be helpful to think about the shape in that negative space, the shape of the wall that's formed around the ellipse of the lamp there. And so it's a tricky form. I'm going to let that, you can see a little bit of the light bulb, the base of the light bulb in there, but it generally is very light. And then the top of this rock that forms the base of the lamp is really subtle. So I don't want to overstate that. First I'm going to indicate that edge here. I'm going to just do a quick evaluation, measuring across the distance from the edge of the photo to this corner. Carry that across, and that's about right. So this should take me to, not to the edge of the table, but near it. So the edge of the table is somewhere right around in here. I just want to make sure that I have enough room for the chair as that starts to come together. Now, you know, getting these angles right, if you're kind of new to drawing, it might feel a little challenging, but there's actually a very simple way to do it. Is just simply have the reference image and the drawing right next to one another. And the same if you're working from a live subject, having the live subject and your surface right next to one another, and you can just compare back and forth, and then use what's called angle sighting to help you adjust the angle. So if I'm looking at this, if this becomes a target for me, I'm closing one eye, placing my pencil so that it aligns with this angle, locking my wrist, bringing it over and comparing it to this edge here on the drawing. And that can help you to see those angles. Again, it's called angle sighting. It's a very kind of a very simple solution, but I know for me that's just something that I would sometimes overlook in the drawing process when I was starting out. So right now I'm trying to be careful about this edge here. I want to run these marks vertically. If there is any sort of directionality to the marks back here, I want them to be vertical. And I'm looking for this specific shape. What I need to do though is I need to calculate this. So we have a distance, this vertical distance from this kind of sharper corner of the table down to the bottom of the paper. We have this distance. I want to compare to this. I'm going to do some comparative measuring here. And that's about right. Now it's so if I take this measurement and I transfer it up here, it should just about intersect with the middle of the light. These things are, again, I think I enlarged the lamp a little bit. Intentionally, I want it to kind of convey that. And now I want to compare this vertical height. That's kind of one of the tricks to working with perspective. When you have a plane that's receding away from you, by blurring your vision, closing one eye, trying to flatten that depth perception, what you're looking for is that vertical height there, and compare it to another element in your drawing. And so in this case, I'm going to compare it to this. And that's just about right. So the height here from the back edge of the table, which I'll kind of lightly indicate, from that back edge to the front edge, there's that vertical height there, a two-dimensional height. You can compare that to then the height from this to this, and that front edge of the tablecloth. And this height should bring you down about 2/3 of the way down this height. And it's one of the things compositionally that I enjoy about this reference photo. I have the credit linked in the description, so check out more work by this photographer. But what I liked about it is there's a certain sense of rhythm to those vertical elements. There's not kind of an even spacing. We have kind of thin, thicker, kind of medium in between for those vertical heights there. And it just creates this pleasing rhythm visually. And again, what's critical in that for me isn't necessarily that the rhythm is pleasing, but by it being pleasing, it's not distracting, right? If these were evenly spaced, then it becomes a distraction from the lamp. Now, if you wanted your drawing to be about that even spacing of those things, and then that's going to draw the attention, that may be what you actually wanted to do. So there's no real kind of right or wrong. I know some artists will say to avoid the even spacing of things and embrace the irregular rhythm. And I've talked about it here as well. But I want to make it clear that it's just what's important is that you know what happens as a result of evenly spaced elements in your drawing. That it's going to pull the gaze a little bit and it's going to flatten things out. And there are a lot of great artists that use that to their advantage to control the composition. That's essentially breaking the rules. If you think of those as rules, then I would do that a lot in my work. I would kind of essentially create bad compositions. But I found them more interesting. So as you can see, my priority here is on that shadow shape, not the chair. And I'm going to set that chair in there in a little bit. All right, welcome everybody. How is everybody doing if you're drawing along? Your drawing coming together? I'm just going to smooth this out a little bit. Using my fingers, that's dangerous because I could drop in some oils on there that are not going to be helpful, but I did it. Now when I squint my eyes, this edge really degrades, and so I don't want to have a hard edge. I'm going to just soften that a little bit over here and enhance that shadow form. Now, in terms of like the straight lines, if you're having a little trouble with getting these horizontal edges, what I'm doing here, actually I have this new table I forgot to mention. My easel that I've been working with throughout the entire series is just sitting out behind me, but there's this new surface that I'm working on, a little bit bigger. So I'm trying this out. But I have the paper oriented perpendicularly or in parallel with the table, and that because it has this raised lip, I can use that to my advantage. I can kind of run my fingers along this edge, find the right distance, and then use that as a guide to create those edges. Now with this edge here, I don't want it to be perfectly flat. Actually, I want to give it a little bit of an angle. And I don't know if it actually is, if that's the optical truth, if that's what the photograph is actually doing. But it kind of feels that way to me, so I want to enhance it just a little bit. And again, it's about finding that balance between it being kind of off, kind of out of scope from the original, enough where it conveys my impression of the subject, but not so much that it becomes a distraction. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. All right, Lita C, thank you. Have a great day. I'm glad you could join even for a little bit. Welcome, Tom Teach. I'm kind of moving in and out of focus in my mind a little bit. So kind of coming into this lampshade again as the focal point and stepping back. Let me see, hopefully this is the soft one. I didn't drop, I can't tell. I kind of rubbed off the label on this pencil using it so much. Yeah, this goes quite a bit darker now. So this is the soft one, bringing in for just a little bit more depth in that, in the shadow areas there. And what I'm trying to observe is that alternating play between light and dark along the edge of the lampshade. So here, for example, this is in shadow, but the lampshade is darker than the wall here. As we move up, then there's a kind of an inverse relationship where now this becomes a little bit darker than that. Very subtle. And as we come over here, it becomes the values are more closely aligned at the base here of the lampshade. But you notice a distinct contrast at the top of the lampshade. So actually, I think I want to enhance that slope a little bit. Actually, there's something in the shape that's not working for me. I think it's still too vertical. I'm going to cut that down a little bit. And it feels a little bit better. I think I don't know exactly what that is, but just kind of reacting to how, my impression of that lampshade. So I haven't done any measuring, but I kind of don't want to do any measuring of the lampshade. And I think what I want to do is just a little bit more value in here. I don't want to darken this top area too much, but I want to go even darker. You can see how that's really making that glow right there. And when it comes to like glowing lights, things like that, it's really easy for that to be kind of create this wow factor, and I would just kind of caution against that a little bit. At least for me, that starts to send off little alarm bells when I start to think of it as almost like a trick, and I kind of default to trying to say, is that an authentic expression of my understanding of the scene, or am I trying to get showy here? And not that showiness is necessarily bad. I mean, there are a lot of great works that are very showy, showing off some amazing skill. It's just not generally the objective I'm going for. All right, so Brenda is saying, having a little trouble with the fold of the tablecloth. Let's work on that a little bit then. Let's give that a shot. Since I have the soft charcoal that's going to allow me the darkest darks, I want to drop in some of those dark areas. And so along this edge where we have the tabletop here, and then it drops down along that back edge that's obscured, right along that edge it gets really dark. And then it gets a little bit darker in this edge, a little bit, it starts to kind of feather out, going to diffuse a little bit as it falls away from the table. And so what I'm looking for now is this angle here contrasting this angle. And then there's this angle in here that's a slight bend. And I'm not going to lighten this up until I add the darkest areas with as I work my way down, I need to have the seat established. That's pretty dark. I'm just kind of rough in a shape there. And in that now, by simply adding that darker shape, it brings this out of that shadow. Lady Hawk Leslie, I draw a while and then go sew a while. That's awesome. That's what we do here. So Golden Peak Media, that Artist Network is part of. We also have our sewing publications, Sew News, Sew Daily. So I work with video producers on that side of things. A lot of good content coming out of there. Sewing is a really cool skill, an art form. I've done quite a bit of hand sewing things when I was younger. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it is a challenge. All right, so back to this. So what I'm doing is I'm going to first make sure I have the form of the table established as in terms of light and shadow. And then I'll address the patterns, and the patterns are going to be really helpful in terms of conveying those folds that we're talking about, really conveying the change in direction of the top plane of the table and then the vertical edge there. So let me see if I want to make sure I get those shapes really right first. And what's nice is that you get this red stripe along the front edge of this table that's darker, and I'm creating a really rough line. I don't want it to be a hard, clean edge. That's going to flatten things out. And then as we come in here, we get this light reflecting off of here, so I'll lift that out, but then there's also kind of the direction of the folds. Now, it's really easy to get lost in all of those stripes in the folds, and try to kind of always come back to just drawing the shapes that you see. We'll apply a little bit of logic to the placement of some of these stripes, but kind of default back to just simply capturing the shapes that you're seeing. And I'm going to start by establishing some of these darker shapes. And so as I find kind of the path of one of these stripes, just a light indication to help map things out and establish that path, but then try to block in that shape without the use of a kind of a hard line. So now what will happen here is with the eraser, and I'll use the sharp edge of that, I can lift out that kind of bright reflection. I'm going to start making it a little bit more broad in a light stroke. So I'm not lifting as the brightest white I can get. I'm starting with something that's a little bit lighter, and then I'm going to come back in and lift out that brighter highlight in the center of it. And then right in here, it really starts to get sharp. There's kind of a sharpness to this corner. It's dark down in here. So I'm going to try to find this shape. Block this in here. Let's see, okay. Whew. All right, thank you, comments. Alex the art guy. I'll check you out as soon as I can after this. Welcome everybody. If you are new, what you're watching is Drawing Together with Artists Network. My name's Scott Maier. We're doing this with 120 episodes already. Holy smokes. We've been doing this for a long time. Yeah. So I think one of the things I'm kind of just stepping back, I want to, before I get the pattern established, I'm going to really kind of lock in the objects here. So I've got this kind of blocked in as a dark value, and one of the things that can be helpful when establishing that and observing these value relationships is to fix your gaze on this part of the reference photo, but put your awareness on the light. And then switch that, fix your gaze here, but put your awareness on this part. And in that way, you can really see the contrast between them. Because if you just isolate this area in the reference photo, those sugar container there, there's a tendency to assign kind of white to that. You know, when optically it's actually this kind of gray. If we look at it in contrast to that bright white, you can see that it's actually quite dark. So by blocking it in as that value, I'm helping to confront that natural inclination to assign that as white because I know it to be white. And so now as I look at the subject, again, I'm keeping my eyes softly focused so that I don't get sucked into any sort of details. I want to see the basic shapes as best I can. There's kind of a softness to the base there. And then there's kind of across the top, there's a few kind of dark marks. That's really all I'm trying to think about, and I'm trying not to identify these as salt and pepper shakers, as a sugar container. I'm just trying to think of what is that shape, what direction do I need to move my pencil, and then build it from there. And by using the side of the pencil, I can really just fill in an area pretty quickly. And instead of light, I can see like a contrast between light and shadow in this area, but instead of lightening at that area, I'm going to try darkening it a little bit and see what that does. And default by going darker, so anything that's going to enhance that light effect up there. And then maybe kind of lift off some light there. And now what I'm drawing from, I have a large version of the reference photo up here on my left that I haven't even looked at because I've got this other window that's covering over it, and I don't want to be tempted to look at all those details. Instead, I'm using the very small thumbnail, the one that's right below me on your screen. That's what I'm actually drawing from. It's giving me all the information I need because I don't need those details yet, the refined edges, the refined elements. So if I feel like now this is still too dark and I want to create a little bit more volume, I'll just use my kneaded eraser. Going to tap out some of those forms, give it a little bit more volume, but hopefully it still puts this in shadow. All right, so we're going to get back to the folds in the table in a bit. So again, kind of squinting, blurring my vision to try to see the overall shapes, value shapes here. And again, just try to lock in on the shape and then try to figure out what direction to make the marks. I'm going to run these horizontally for now. And just by doing that, it's starting to suggest the pattern. I'm just using the side of the blending stump and reacting to the shapes that I'm seeing. I think I do want to sharpen this up. So I'm going to use this sharp edge here of the eraser, and it's going to lift off too much. And I can knock it down a little bit too. So again, I just want to have that sharper edge there. All right. Oh, Lady Hawk Leslie, what is a sewing channel? We just launched it. It was kind of relatively new. I believe it's the Sew Daily or Sew News YouTube channel. Meg Healy we work with, she posts content on there. Check that out. All right. Let's get to this. Now this is going to be the fun part. Let's get these stripes put in there. So again, I want this to be the focal point. So I need to kind of go into the decisions about these stripes with an understanding right out the gate of what role I want those to play. I think what I want to make sure I achieve by adding those stripes is a reinforcement of the perspective of the table. If I add too much in that area, if it's too sharp, if it's kind of too clearly defined, then it might actually end up and detracting, and I don't want to do that. Now, again, that's a personal decision I'm making, and you might make an entirely different decision with regards to that. So now I'm talking about doing the tabletop, but of course I'm working on this back wall. I'm kind of preparing myself for that area. This is an area that requires a little less thinking, and I can kind of have some fun with it, decompress a little bit. And you can see I'm just making multiple passes, holding the pencil way back so that I don't have too much pressure applied to the tip of it. I want to get a little bit darker along this edge. Okay. I just kind of needed to work on an area that didn't require a whole lot of thinking, because the area that I'm moving into now, I need to start kind of calculating a little bit more. Because if I, kind of going back to the balance issue, if I'm kind of too far off with these stripes, if they're kind of irregularly spaced and it's all kind of casual, that could be a distraction. If they're too sharp, it could be a distraction. So I want to try to find that balance, kind of the Goldilocks zone of these stripes. So let's see. Okay. Going to get into this. The things that are really standing out, so again, starting by looking at the subject with blurred vision, I'm just trying to take it all in, and as it comes into focus, what comes out first for me are these three stripes that run horizontally across the front. And what it appears to show is an even spacing between the red and the white stripes. So that means that as I lay the stripes in, the negative space between them should be roughly equivalent to the space that the red areas occupy. So I'm switching back to the harder charcoal. Just got a foot cramp. That's uncomfortable. Now, one of the things that I never thought about much when I was younger was my posture when I'm working. But now that I'm getting older, I feel myself like my shoulders kind of tighten up. I get foot cramps. My back starts hurting, and I don't know, just adds another layer to the challenge of making art now. Okay, so if I start with something like that, and you can see that I'm letting this area get a little bit kind of lighter here. Oh, Siri just.
Sorry, I'm still not sure about
that. Siri came on. Let's see. Hydration. Oh, that's a good. I do need to hydrate a bit more. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of rough in these paths that I want these red stripes to take. And then I'm going to kind of expand them until I find the right balance between kind of the red and the white area. So I'm using the side of the pencil intentionally. And then I will kind of roll into the edge when I feel more confident about the thickness of that stripe. And I'm letting it become irregular. We can see it at this end here, it starts to kind of curl in because of the nature of this fold. It changes the shape there. So you don't have to pull out a ruler. Actually, I think I'm intentionally not using a straight edge here because that would sharpen those lines to a degree that could make it distracting. Again, that's my objective, is to find that balance. I want to make this the area of sharp focus. But if you're so inclined to really sharpen up these lines, then pull out a straight edge. There's nothing wrong with that. But just be kind of aware, make a calculated decision about how straight you want that to be. So like I said, if you observe in the photo, they're not perfectly horizontal stripes here. And I'm going to work really all three of them at once. And to try to find that balance. If I kind of refine one stripe, then move to the next one, and move to the next one, it gets really difficult to see how they all fit together properly. So I'm trying to keep it all in flux. Now looking at the spacing here. One of the things that becomes a little tricky in calculating the spacing, observing that spacing, is that there's a visual weight to the red and to the white that's different. And so I have a tendency to see the white areas as larger than the red, but I believe that they're essentially the same. So I'm really using just the lightest touch I can with the charcoal, and taking multiple passes rather than trying to commit to it as one stroke. And one of the reasons I want to do that is I want to make sure that there's no kind of directionality to the marks themselves. If they're a horizontal shape, what I should be probably doing is changing the direction of the marks. So they're running vertically, but it's really difficult to do that. But so the trade-off in that, if I now switching to these marks that run parallel with the direction of those red stripes, is that I run the risk of really kind of flattening it out and making these stripes kind of pop off the surface, and I don't want that to happen. So I just have to be really careful with the edges. I don't want to draw a line along those edges. I can come in here with the eraser and essentially the thickness of the eraser is kind of lining up with the thickness of the white stripe there. And then see how that compares to the thickness of the red areas. Whew. There's a lot going on there. Tom Teach is talking about kind of eyeballing. Yeah, and I guess that is a calculated decision I'm making, is to not really calculate, and I'm not dropping indicators on the page. And part of that is because I'm trying to react to the subject. What can happen sometimes is if you kind of map it out and you lay down a grid essentially, and then you kind of fill it in, is that then you're reacting to that initial grid rather than the subject. It's really difficult to adapt. And so I'm kind of intentionally kind of trying to keep things flexible in this whole process and really kind of adapt to make sure they all fit together the way they should. And there's an interesting kind of quality of light. There's a window coming in on this side that we become aware of through that change in value over here. You can start to see that light reflecting off of that surface. So hopefully that makes sense, because my goal is with the stripes on the tabletop, it should all feel really integrated. And it's so easy for a pattern like this that is so distinct to just float to the surface. And if you're struggling with that, if you're finding that the stripes are really popping off, then wipe it down, kind of build it up again, and try to kind of find that balance between the variety, the clarity of those marks, and the unity, merging all of those together. And there's some kind of light, a little bit catching over here. All right, so now, it's going to be the fun part. You can kind of calculate out the number of vertical stripes along this edge, or you can kind of wing it. Now, in this case, it looks like the width of these stripes is equivalent to the width of the eraser, so I could use the eraser as a bit of a guide, right? And kind of lightly indicate. So draw a line here with the eraser very lightly, so I don't lose it. Measure across one eraser width, then over another one. And trying to observe, there's a slight radiating quality to those vertical edges where they kind of lean in this direction on the left-hand side, but by the time we work over here, there's a slight angle that way. Perhaps I exaggerated that a little bit too much, but so now I have some rough guides that I can use. Tom teaches, it looks great. Actually, I run into problems when trying to match the values. I'd love to hear more about that. What you're observing in your work that you would like to kind of improve on. Are you finding that they're kind of too dark sometimes, or too light? So now I'm kind of doing taking the same approach as I did to the horizontal stripes, dropping in these vertical ones using the eraser lines as guides, trying to find this kind of the center of each vertical stripe, and then working out left and right to fill in that space, and again find that balance. So now that we end up with these negative spaces that are largely rectangular. So I'm just kind of giving myself some indications. So I think one of the things that I kind of observed, I mentioned at the top of the show that I had tried this, this is the third time now I've drawn this subject. And the first time I got too absorbed, I think, in the pattern on the tabletop, on the tablecloth, I mean, and I couldn't really get out of it. I had kind of set myself too rigid of a foundation, and I found it was just easier for me to start from scratch again and just shift my thinking to light and shadow. And so now in this way, I've kind of captured the overall essence of the stripes. Now what I'm observing in my drawing is that I'm seeing the horizontal and vertical stripes as equivalent, when the vertical ones are actually quite a bit lighter. So I'm going to kind of gently knock that down and then reestablish the horizontal stripes to create a bit of a hierarchy. So what I guess going back to what I was just saying, though, is that I'm trying to treat the pattern as something I'm really kind of struggling through, not getting caught up in that natural instinct to kind of set a rigid pattern as though it's some sort of kind of crutch. Because it's too complex, I need some sort of, I need a rigid system that I can keep myself tied to. And instead, I'm trying to keep loose and flexible and kind of discover these forms in the process, be willing for it to just become a hot mess. And that's kind of my thinking. Like I said, I think the initial take I had on this subject kind of treated this too rigidly, and there wasn't enough room for exploration in the whole process. Now let's see. If you're so kind of inclined to kind of sharpen up the pattern, you can continue from this and kind of work back and forth between in the positive and negative space. So actually what I'll do is I'll kind of sharpen my eraser, being careful not to slice my thumb. So now I have this sharp edge, and I'll start over here where it's a little bit whiter, and I can lift out some of these white squares in the negative space. Stepping back, kind of looking at it from a distance. And in my case, I'm looking up into the screen. And I'm trying to ease into it. I'm not going to assume that everything needs clarification. I'm going to make a few notes, evaluate, see what kind of clarity it provides. Actually, I think I want to be mindful too of the light across that whole surface. Look at it in context of this element here. And then kind of move back and forth between the again, the positive and negative space on this pattern. This is where I can kind of switch to this this vertical stroke along this horizontal path. Just keeping the marks light just to sharpen up in a few areas. And if I focus on these squares where they intersect, that can also convey a certain amount of information. So what's happening is that what I'm trying to do is, like what I said earlier, where when I'm looking at the subject, and by squinting at the subject and degrading my vision to the point where I can barely see the subject, and then gradually bringing it into focus and trying to find that point at which the mind fills in the missing information, that's what I'm looking for here. Is where does it really start to click? And for me, it might be at a slightly different point than it is for you. But in doing so, the thought is that the viewer's mind will be excited by being asked to engage and fill in some of that missing information. I think that's we all as humans love puzzles. We love solving things and solving mysteries. And so what we're doing is we're leaving a little bit of mystery in the subject, giving the viewer's mind something to kind of chew on a little bit and discover for itself. So I want to, and I think that's good. I was going to lift out this area here, a little bit of the checkered pattern in this area. I don't know if I like that. Let's see. Maybe it's all right. I feel like that's just too much. I can knock that down. So again, hopefully what I'm conveying in this is a strategy for navigating something that can be really intimidating, but by tackling it in such a way that you're still open to discovery and kind of allowing the struggle of it all to become evident in the drawing itself. Okay, there's a pattern. Gotta breathe. Okay. Good morning from Guam. Welcome. Tammy, that's so great to hear. I'm glad that this is a healthy part of your life there. So, Tom teaches saying, would it be a good idea to practice one-point perspective for lining up the angles? So let me come back to that perspective. That's a really good question. That's where it's going to become really helpful here. And for me, I have a course on this on Artist Network on perspective. And the goal in the course is to give enough information where you can build an intuitive understanding about perspective. So that if anything, that intuition can lead you can look at it and say, the perspective looks off, and it looks off because it's not in this specific way. Because what can happen sometimes is that we can look at a drawing and say, the perspective looks off, but I don't know why or how to fix it. What aspect is actually off? And so if we can build an intuition around that, then we know how to manipulate the angle and the direction of our marks so that we can be a bit more fluid. Because what can sometimes happen is we get caught in the trap of calculating the perspective. And there are a lot of great artists out there that love to really calculate perspective, find a vanishing point, look at the orthogonal edges, measure things out, and really dial it in. That's a very satisfying process, and I've definitely done a lot of that. But it's not for everybody, and if it's not for you, then if you can build an intuition about where the vanishing point is and which angles should generally be leading in that direction of the vanishing point, you can go a long way. So again, that's one of those aspects of the viewer's mind that will fill in missing information is accuracy and perspective. It needs to know generally where the vanishing points are, where those lines should be leading, but it's not going to actually apply mental straight edges to everything and really make sure that each element lines up. And the way I really kind of observe this, the best example of this is if you look at M.C. Escher's drawing, the Assyrian staircases. He's got one, they look like they're endless staircases. They work as illusions because if you trace out the lines, they move in the direction of where the vanishing points should be, but they don't quite line up. If you get really precise, you realize that he's fudging with things a little bit, and it's in those slight variations that he's able to then play with our brains a little bit. So we accept it initially as true. So when you look at one of those drawings or the etchings, or woodblocks, I think those are, many of them are, when you look at them, we accept them as true. Your initial response is, oh, that looks like a believable three-dimensional structure. And then as you look more closely, you realize, wait a minute, those stairs shouldn't be able to line up exactly how they're doing that. And it's because he's leaning in on that idea that we're going to accept the truth of perspective if they're approximately accurate. And then within that approximation is where you can really have some fun. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Even with 2 years of experience, I still struggle with 1 and 2 point perspective. Yeah, there's a lot to it. And it is a very rigid system that works best to describe the optical truth from a given position, right? Now this is where the cubist would play around with things, right? Because if you look at Picasso or Braque's cubist pieces, they are questioning the literal truth of things. So, so for example, the literal truth of this table is that it has a top, it has a front side, it has a back side, and it has a left and right side. Now we can only see two sides of this, but we know the other sides to exist. And so in this way, we're not telling the literal truth of the table, we're telling the optical truth. And in the mind of a cubist, all of those truths are valid to some degree. And if you kind of open the mind up to suggest that perhaps the optical truth is less accurate, do we prioritize literal truth or optical truth or symbolic truth? Then it frees us up to make a lot of decisions. And so just kind of putting that out there with there are limitations to perspective, and the trick in that is that when it's done accurately, we accept it as being this perfect illusion. But it is false. So the literal truth of the light that enters our eyes is that everything is curved. What we're taking in optically in our retinas is a fisheye lens view of the world. All of those edges are curved, right? The light is bent around the curve of the lens in our eye, around the curve of the retina. When you look at, if in this room here, the edges of the walls are parallel here, but they're angled in front of us. There's a curve that happens around us. But what happens is that curve is not really helpful for us, right? If I'm in a rectangular room, understanding the truth that they're actually, optically, they're curved, the mind is taking in these lines as curved, that doesn't help us. So what happens is our brain corrects for that fish-eye view of the world, and we see them as straight lines. We understand them as straight edges because that understanding is more helpful to our understanding of the room. It's better for us to know that these lines in this room are straight and parallel with one another. So our brain is actually interpreting a lot, and that's what one-point perspective is that it's that interpretation that varies from kind of what's happening optically. So if you look at artists like Rackstraw Downs, right? He's this amazing realist painter who does these panoramic landscapes, and he lets all of those curves bend because that's really what is happening in that space, in that environment. But then you can also look at these drawings and paintings that have really strict, straight edges that align with what our brain is interpreting. So you can kind of take that in so many different ways. And so that's a bit of a tangent. All right. Back to what we need to learn here. All right, so I'm going to roughly estimate where the vanishing point is somewhere around here. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the main angles of this table. If I extend this far enough, it leads up into this direction here. I can kind of indicate that. If I look at this angle here, I can carry this across, and where they seem to intersect is right about there. Now, these lines here on the table that are receding away, they're very subtle in the photograph, but we know them to be there. They are parallel with the edges of the table. So they're going to share that vanishing point as well. So if I just kind of roughly estimate that the vanishing point is somewhere around here, as I drop in marks in the table, I can be aware of how they might extend to that vanishing point. If I come over here, what we know also about these stripes is that this stripe here continues across the surface. So this is where I can start the stripe and then point in that direction of the vanishing point. All right, so that's really what I'm kind of thinking about here. Because when it gets really tricky, when you're directly below a vanishing point or adjacent to it, because these lines here, like if it was directly below the vanishing point, that line that I'm making would be vertical, and they're just offset a little bit, and so it's kind of messing with our brains a little bit. So optically, this one's leaning in to the right a little bit, this one's leaning into the left a little bit to converge at generally that vanishing point. And so again, I'm just kind of I'm testing the waters first, dropping in some of these marks, and then I can kind of adjust. And so if like this one feels like it's a little bit off, I can work this a little bit better. I can start to visualize some of the other stripes on that side of the table. Now I've made these marks a bit too explicit based on the way I'm observing light to play off of the surface. I'm going to knock that down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to knock this whole thing down in value so that it's not as bright as the light on the wall or in the lampshade. But you can see that when I talked earlier about making decisions, like what I'm kind of forming my decisions around primarily are what is the shape, what is the direction, right? And that's what I'm looking at here. In this case, I'm using that vanishing point to establish the directionality of the marks. So I hopefully that makes sense. Hello, Heather, welcome. Yeah, hopefully that the comments about perspective make sense. There's so much to perspective, and it's really fascinating. I worked on a paper in graduate school about the origins of linear perspective because I think it's really fascinating that we can trace it to a single point, a single place where the artist was standing in Florence. I believe it was Florence. Actually, it was 25 years ago, or over 20 years ago that I wrote that paper. But you can trace it back to the single point where you can really see it being played out. And in most cultures throughout our history they had different ways of conveying depth and perspective. And I think part of what allowed it to happen was the changes in our society in which things became more regular. Buildings were rectangular, parallel with one another, straight. The streets were straight, buildings were tall, and in that environment, you can see that linear perspective take shape a little bit more easily. So it's really kind of a fascinating thing for me to think about that. We kind of accept it as truth in Western art, but it's really just another convention among many that have been developed by cultures around the world. And it prioritizes the viewer being in a fixed location, and it prioritizes kind of rectangular structures. And it prioritizes kind of the optics of it rather than the literal forms. And so that's when you see a lot of abstraction come out that address that. Again, cubism being a primary one. I want to drop a bit of a shadow in here. Okay, so hopefully that looks like it's coming together okay. I want to hopefully that makes sense and gives you some sort of support for drawing the tabletop. Let me know how that resonates for you. I'm going to kind of lift off some light on the table. So I'm just looking at the shape of the light, again, through blurred vision, trying to figure out how the light is falling on that surface of the table. Maybe sharpen up this edge just a little bit. I wish Tom teacher. I wish I knew where that paper was. That was it was a long time ago, and I don't know as if I would have done a very good job at that age. So, but like I said, I do have that course on perspective on Artist Network that I'll try to link to in the description after I do this. All right, now the chair. The chair actually gives me a little bit more anxiety than the tabletop. I think that's why I did the tabletop first. It's going to be tricky. Let's see. I gotta regroup a little bit. So I'm just kind of decompressing, working on another area. Again, my brain is trying to solve the problem of the chairs right now, or the chair, but I'm avoiding because having done it once, it was a challenge, and I don't want to mess up in front of a live audience. That's the truth about it. All right. So to help direct me, I want to become aware again of that vanishing point, because there's the path. If we connect the tips of the chair backs there, because they're parallel with that edge of the table, they're going to share that vanishing point. So let me first just kind of drop in some marks that would kind of indicate it. Feel like the spacing is generally right. I'm not going to measure it out, but if you want to go right ahead. And the way I'm going to tackle this is to try to draw both of them at the same time, kind of move back and forth, keep them in sync with one another. I have this kind of as a rough guide. And what I observe is that we have this bend here. It starts to get largely vertical along this section, largely vertical along here. Now, the other aspect that I want to be aware of, again, is the vanishing point. So just as we visualized the path that connects the tops of the chairs to the vanishing point, at the bends would happen parallel with one another, in line with one another. And then if you were to visualize a line that passes through that bend to that vanishing point, that helps you to place the bend, because this being a little bit closer, it's not a matter of measuring down the same distance in each chair back there. We have to come down a little bit farther here, and to help us figure out how far down to go, we can use that vanishing point. And then as we come down in here, it goes from straight to kind of curved in a little bit, and then kind of vertical right in there, kind of vertical right about here. I'm using the blending stump because it's just a softer way to describe these things, and it feels a little less committed, because I'm not ready to commit to these shapes here. But as it starts to come together, I can kind of eyeball it a little bit, and it feels pretty good. Now this distance here feels like it's too wide. The other thing that I need to observe is that this is larger, because it's closer to us, than this. There's also kind of a slight change in angle there. So if I come in a little bit, make this a little bit larger, that helps to close in some of the gap, and I can kind of work on this as well. So again, I got to kind of need to have the ability, the flexibility to kind of sculpt the form a little bit, really move the charcoal around. And then just lightly sharpening the edge with this eraser. And then these light lines will disappear at some point. I'm looking at keeping that section largely parallel. So really just kind of sneaking up on it. Let's see. Now, I'm not worried about the values here. And to kind of go back to, there's a question earlier, about a comment about just having trouble with values. Again, one of the challenges in values is, again, we're always interpreting values as a relationship between them. We don't have the ability, it's not a mental capacity that we have, to understand a value in isolation. It's not like perfect pitch that some people have, where you can hear a note out of context and say that frequency is an E or an A. Value doesn't work that way because of the way our rods and cones are structured. Color is the same way. Color and value, we are always viewing as a comparison to one another, to something else next to it. So just kind of, I'm putting that out there, that generally absolute understanding of the values is may not necessarily be valuable to you, but understanding the value relationships really is. How much lighter or how much darker is something, right? Then, and part of the reason that can be valuable is that the quality of the paper is going to be different for everybody. This has one intensity of brightness than another type of paper. You may be working with one that's more kind of a cream colored, right? That's going to limit your value range or affect the value range because there might be a paper that's a little bit darker than this. But you can still manage the value relationships equivalently. So. And then Lady Hawk Leslie, what about the phenomenon of our brains seeing a color image in person or photograph, but using pencil or charcoal to draw it in grayscale? Oh, so interpreting color as value, that's really what the challenge of it, right? And that's, you're going to find the greatest benefit, the greatest opportunity for growth working from life in that regard. And because it is such a challenge, because we're taking in both the frequency of light that tells us what the color is, what the hue is, but then there's also the intensity, and there's also the value. So it's hue, value, and saturation. Hue is the color, whether it's red, yellow, blue, etc. Value describes how light or dark it is, from white to black. And then saturation describes its intensity, like how vibrant that color is. And they all have an interplay there in that the more saturated a color, the more likely we're to interpret that as a lighter value. So it really gets kind of tricky. There are certain tricks, though, that you can employ to help you to achieve a greater accuracy. So just optically, what you can do with your eyes is to practice the art of the indirect gaze, what I say. So you're going to find that, or at least I find that I'm more accurate in my understanding of value and color relationships when I move my gaze adjacent to my target, but put my awareness on that target. So if I'm looking at that lampshade, for example, and I'm trying to interpret that value or the hue or the color, I'll fix my gaze just to the left or right of it and then observe it slightly in my periphery. It just seems to be more sensitive to hue, value, and saturation, because the center of your field of vision is going to be prioritized to detail at the expense of value and color relationships. A key example that I enjoy observing all the time is that I can ultimately kind of see the moon more on a full moon. If you look just adjacent to it, I feel like I can actually see the value relationships more clearly, the texture of the moon more clearly than when I look directly at it. And so practice that art of indirect gaze and see how that helps. And then kind of digitally, you can also, taking a photograph can be really illuminating in that regard, because you can test your assumptions about value and color by converting it to grayscale. Now, the computer and the camera is going to make a certain set of decisions about the value and the color of whatever subject it is, and that's going to be different than what you as a human will make. But it can get you to question the value in the hue a bit more, and teach you something about those values by converting it to grayscale. That happens a lot for me when I'm in the landscape. If I see like a bright yellow, for example, I saw that a lot this fall. We had some really beautiful color here in Colorado, where I have a tendency to interpret that as a lighter value than it actually is. And so when I drop the value but increase the saturation, that's when I would find that I would actually find a better balance. But I would have a default to actually making it lighter in value that I have to fight against. And that it made it easier for me to observe by just playing around with photos and converting them to grayscale, and then going out into the field and then trying to practice that and observe it. So I'm not doing that. I'm still making paintings on location, but like as a side practice, just trying to kind of isolate the colors. The other thing that you can do, and in one of my color theory courses at Artist Network, is that exercise of taking in this case I did a Vermeer reference image, and then doing kind of a color chart from that digitally. I use Photoshop, and you just isolate that color and say, all right, here's the color of the hat, here's the color of the flesh in the shadow, and here's the color of the fabric, here's the color of the flesh in light, right? And then when you isolate that color and you move it onto like a white or a gray background, it might help to illuminate something about the value or the hue, what it actually is. Some people will hold up a piece of paper with a hole cut out in front of their subject, again, to isolate it from the context of everything else. Just see that color in isolation. That can also be kind of helpful. And you just kind of put all of that information together to come up with a deeper understanding of the hue, value, and saturation. So I hope that I kind of went on a rant there. I hope that made sense. All right, thank you, everybody. Hello, got a name from California. Oh, and then Tom Teacher was talking about the apps. So I've been reviewing some the apps. So there's the DaVinci Eye app, and there's also the Camera Lucida. So the Camera Lucida app is the one that I most recently reviewed. And they have some fascinating tools that will, in particular, I think that Camera Lucida that I just did, they'll break it down into different colors for you. So you take your reference image, and it will break down the different shapes and values. And for me, the value in all of those is, again, to help me to achieve a deeper understanding of the subject. You can use them as really ways to draw and build your images from them, but I like to kind of use it as a way to help discover something about the subject and then try to observe it in life, when working from life. One other thing that I found really helpful as a painter to do was to switch and try soft pastels for a bit. If you've never worked with pastels, they're a little bit expensive, but I think it's a really valuable medium to explore because you don't have the ability to mix color on a palette the way you do with paint. All right? So I'm used to just grabbing from a limited set of colors, mixing the hue, value, and saturation that I want. With soft pastels, you have hundreds of sticks in front of you, and they're all very subtle transitions between them, but you have to make a decision. Is that color that I'm observing in nature, is that more blue? Is it more green? Is it more red? And it can be really tricky sometimes because, again, the value relationships. If you were to take one color, isolate it, putting it on a white background, you might observe that it's a red. But when you look at it in the context of everything else, it might look green because it's in the context of something that's more red. Right? So again, we're trying to our brain interpret those things as a relationship between them. So as light comes in and as it strikes the cones and the rods in our eyes, it determines the frequency of light, say red, along that spectrum. Not only what is that frequency of red, but how different is it from the green wavelength, right? It takes in both of those information, sends that as an electrical signal to our brain that our brain then has to interpret, right? There's so much to it. So you take vibrating photons, pass through our lens onto our retina where these little cells activate. They look at that frequency along a spectrum. They're comparing red to green, blue to yellow, converting that into electrical signal that goes to our brain. And our eyes are actually part of the brain, which is a fascinating thing. It's the part of our brain that actually extends outside of the cranial cavity. But it follows the optical nerve to the parts of our brain that then have to interpret it and assign that frequency as red or blue or yellow. It's really, really wild stuff that I'm really glad that we live in a time where there are scientists that are able to kind of put some, just put some more information into what's happening, more clarity about what's happening in our brain when we interpret color. All right, so that was a bit of a tangent. All right, so hopefully what I've done in here kind of makes sense. I've just been kind of massaging those forms, looking at them back and forth. I kind of lifted out the highlight along that front corner. Before I get too far, I want to drop in the shadow that's being cast along that wall. So just these small circular marks because it's a very soft and diffused form. And then there's a stripe up here. Not going to be too accurate with it, but there's starting to, enough of a shadow there. I didn't leave as much space on the left as the photo illustrates. And I feel like what I've done is I've made I've slanted the chair back a little bit too much. But I'm going to go with it because it's already 3:06 and I got to get going pretty soon. So, all right, Tammy. Said you worked with oil pastels on black paper. That's awesome. Okay, so now we have the final thing is to add these cross braces. And I want to again be aware of the vanishing point. So because they're parallel with the table, roughly, they should appear to converge at that vanishing point. So I'm just going to kind of indicate these, just these rough marks here. Try to look at something that feels like it's generally evenly spaced. It's pretty challenging to see. But first I want to kind of just visualize that path. So that I can understand that perspective there. And then from there, it's a matter of looking at the positive and negative space, so the distance between these forms, and what the unique shape is. And you can, if we look here, I wasn't super accurate with it. I spent a little bit more time, but I kind of eyeballed it. There's some inaccuracy, but I think as a whole it works out okay. I kind of like the light in this one a little bit better. And so this is where it gets really kind of tricky. But having this as a guide to help place the forms can be helpful. So I'm going to try to work all of them at the same time. And actually what I want to do is try to visualize the center of each of those. So I've got the general axis for each of those cross braces. I've got the center and the spacing now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of average some of these forms, kind of build out from the center. Trying to observe the overall perspective, keeping in mind where that vanishing point is. Actually, this I think is going to represent the top of that cross brace. Now, in this way, I'm kind of outlining these forms, which could be trouble. But what I'm trying to do is one part of these cross braces to the next, I'm looking at, one stretch of the cross pieces, these supports, and trying to notice how they change as we move down. And I'm trying to just observe the abstract qualities of these, not think too much about each of these shapes. Just try to break it down into a series of shapes. trust the abstraction. Don't force it into be a shape that you know it to be. This is where it gets really tricky, kind of battling what we know that shape is from but in comparing it to what we're able to actually see. I'm just going to kind of sketch that one in. It's in the shadow. Let that fall in shadow. In this way, like I feel like this gap is too large, and so this could come down a little bit farther. I think that's what I did. I feel like I placed this generally accurately, but I need to move this down. And I don't know how much I'm going to really refine this because I am running a little bit long and I've got to get to something. I don't have the ability to stay here longer. So let me see. I'm going to actually just move this whole thing down. Try to shift my thinking between the positive and negative spaces. So I left the old one in there, and I'll erase out the incorrect one. So if you're kind of working on this area, kind of see how it all works in context with one another, but try not to commit to the placement of anything and try to move them in kind of sequence. You kind of get them all in there and just kind of then move them around as though they're modular. All right, so that's a bit of a hot mess, but hopefully that's enough to give you a sense for the kind of the process that I go through to complete this. I think this definitely needs more kind of refinement. Those cross pieces are a bit clumsy at this point. I think it's a good word to use. I can refine this with some negative shapes here. So I'm looking at that shape now. But like I said, hopefully that's enough to give you a certain strategy that might help if you're stuck in something like that in that area. That's at least how I understand the process and how I navigate it. Yeah, that was a lot. I got exhausted. But I'm going to hang out for just a few more minutes, see if there's any other questions. I think I'm done working on this for today. I don't feel like the drawing itself is done, but I might work on it a little bit more, later when I have more time. But it just does get to be a little mentally exhausting, when there's so much to kind of calculate in some of those areas here. But again, the focus is on the light, and so constructing everything starting from just that play between light and shadow on the paper, and then allowing the objects within that light to emerge. And the goal is to create an environment that feels like it's all infused with the same light, right? Not separate objects that are stuck in the space. So we got a lot of challenging aspects to it, with the pattern on the tablecloth and with that chair back. But like I said, hopefully it gives you enough of a strategy that you can feel a little bit more confident. If you were struggling with it, hopefully it gives you a little bit of confidence that you can get through it. Just a matter of kind of being, kind of tackling it in a way that allows you to adjust and adapt and grow. So there you have it. So again, next week, I won't be able to be here live, but I do have a demo that I recorded that'll go live at the same time, so 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays. So if you're new, again, this is Drawing Together with Artists Network. My name is Scott Maier, and we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Check out the link in the description below. So if you were drawing along and you want to share your drawing with us, you can share it on Artists Network on the show page there. If you are watching this as a recording, I want to hear your comments in the recording as well, because we get all of this stuff happening in the chat. And you can view that in the playback, but I think there's also, I want to hear from you all. So if you're finding us new for the first time, welcome. We have a lot of us that have been together for a long time now. We're at episode 120, and many of you have been with us the entire time. So I thank you all so much. Let's see. Thank you for the positive comments. Thank you for all the questions. Have a great week. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I'll be back live in 2 weeks. Enjoy the recording next week.